Okay, we're continuing with quotes with the letter A from the book Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're on King Arthur now. So King Arthur is very interesting. Basically, if you want to be sophisticated at reading Western literature, you have to know the basics of the Bible. You just have to, or you're an ignoramus. You have to know the basics of the ancient Greeks. You should know about the ancient Romans. You should know about the Renaissance. And you should know about King Arthur stories, because tons of literary references, allusions, they're going to come from this. So you should have a general idea of it. You don't have to be a scholar of it, but you should just have the general idea. And it's okay to read the picture books, to watch the cartoons or the movies. It all fits and builds together. Okay, so Geoffrey of Monmouth, Oxford scholar, suggests a Welsh origin of King Arthur. So, I kind of view, my father's from Ireland, so I view the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots as all persecuted by Britain. So we see them as having a lot in common. Let's see, and of course, Monty Python and the Holy Grail was a great movie in the tradition of the King Arthur stories. And there's all kinds of characteristic things of the great legends, disputed paternity, a miracle birth, a childhood raised by another family. Okay, and then there was also the idea of the Roman who stayed. When Rome was collapsing back around 476 AD, a lot of the Roman troops, they all returned back to Rome to try to defend its borders from the barbarians. And then, England of that time was sort of left defenseless. And there were some men who had trained, including the legendary King Arthur, had trained with the Romans, and he knew how to be better able to fight when the Anglo-Saxons would come to raid England, the Vikings and whatnot. Okay, so the whole thing is that it's a great story, and then all the different knights that came to the round table, the legend goes on, then the French get involved, and there's all the love stories with Guinevere, etc., and Lancelot and everything. Then there's the idea of the round table and the Holy Grail. I've made separate entire videos about all the art that goes with King Arthur and the Middle Ages and whatnot. So I'm not going to go into that right now, but just so you know, it's out there. If you're interested in learning about King Arthur, I've read a lot about it. This is the best course. This lady, her name is Professor Darcy Armstrong. The great courses had a lot of good DVD courses. You can get them on Audible to listen to it. And it's good enough just to listen to it. You don't have to get the DVD. So she did a really good job with the course. I'll show you a picture of her. This is her. And her course on King Arthur was very good. She also has a course on scholars of the Middle Ages, and I thought it was really weak. It wasn't any good. But her King Arthur course was very good. Here she is in front of Stonehenge. Okay. And, the picture books are good. I think for kids, it's good to read things like these picture comic books or picture story books. I think Wyeth did a really nice illustrated book of King Arthur. And, you learn the Lady of the Lake, pulling the sword. All of that stuff is part of legend. And I think if anybody wants to write, you'll be a much better writer if you know these common legends. And also, you'll be a better reader. You can make sense out of stuff. You have to know this stuff to get all the literary allusions in these common books. And the King Arthur story, it's quite a story. It's a little bit of a Christ analog. Okay, Solomon Asch, the next guy on our list of authors for quotes, he's the guy who did the experiments that showed that if he would have 10 Confederates and they would all agree on something that was not true, almost always they could get the regular person to conform and agree with them, even though they knew it was not true, just because most people care more about socially fitting in. And I see America's going more and more pressure to conform. And that's bad. I can remember when I was a kid, I went to the public swimming pool. There was a big sign on the wall. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to have a purpose. Dare to make it known. And I'm telling you, the more society turns away from Christianity, the more it becomes conformist, mediocre, violent and stupid. It sucks, okay? Third world barbarism, like the collapse of Rome. I remember I went to Amazon a long time ago, and I was having a hard time finding Edward Gibbon's Collapse of Rome, a hard time finding the Leo Damrose course about Edward Gibbon's Collapse of Rome. It was like they didn't want me to find it. I could find all their other books, but it took me a big effort to find that book. And what I'm saying is there's tons of parallels to the collapse of Rome as there are right now to the collapse of Western world and Western Christianity. Okay, but anyway, Solemn Asch is kind of scary. So what it basically says, the more that people are conformist wimps, the more things that are untrue will be forced on them. So that's why you want to have strong people. And that's why it's good to have a Bible reading population, because you read enough of the stuff in the Bible. And believe me, it's a rough book. There's all kinds of harsh things in there. It gets you to kind of have a backbone. And that's what people need. Otherwise, they're all going to end up being groomed for slavery. All this multiculturalism, everything is the same, everything is equal. That's the path to the cow going to the what type of house slaughter. Okay, that's not going to give us a future and freedom. Okay, next person we're going to talk about is John Ashbery. Just has a quote. Poetry is mostly hunches. I feel that poetry is going on all the time inside an underground stream. Yeah, it'd be good that people spend a little more time learning how to write poetry, because if you can write poetry, you can write anything. It's the most difficult thing to write. You could write a song. You could easily write prose. Isaac Asimov, he was a guy very prolific, wrote about 400 books. He lived from 1920 to 1992, and he said, self-education, I firmly believe, is the only kind of education that there is. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. We remember the things that we wanted to learn. We don't remember much of what was forced on us in school. So people really ought to have a lot more time to read and study on their own. Homeschool kids learn so much better, so much thoroughly. They're so much advanced compared to public school kids. It's not even funny. Isaac Asimov, the easiest way to solve a problem is to pretend that it doesn't exist. Unfortunately, though, the situation doesn't resolve. The most exciting phrase to hear in science is the one that heralds the most new discoveries is not eureka, but that's funny. Any book worth banning is a book worth reading. Okay, Isaac Asimov, famous science and science fiction writer. I used to read him when I was a kid because my father read him, and I wanted to read what my father wrote about. He writes a lot of science fiction stuff. I'm not a big fan of science fiction, though. Okay, St. Francis of Assisi. He lived from 1182 to 1226. And St. Francis of Assisi said, where there is despair, may we bring hope. He was kind of a neat guy. I like the story of him, his vision of he's going to rebuild the church, both physically, and he did rebuild the church physically, but also by inspiring people. Okay, St. Francis of Assisi quotes, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. And yeah, people can preach by example. My mother, man, she was a Roman Catholic, and man, she was the best person I ever saw in my life. You know that Melanie Hampton, like in Gone with the Wind, the movie, who was a great lady? My mom was way better lady than that lady. You couldn't believe it. My mom was always doing the right thing, and because she was the devout Christian, man, and nothing would get in her way. She would, no matter what the circumstances, do the right thing, even when it was quite surprising, shocking even. And that's why we admired her so much. Okay, St. Francis of Assisi continues, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Okay, so there's St. Francis of Assisi. He's pretty nice. A lot of people, he's their favorite saint. So I like him. I think he's great. I think the movies about him are real good. I think I did a video review of one of the movies about him that was quite good. There's a whole DVD course. I went through the DVD course about his life, and yeah, he's a pretty heroic guy. Okay, some quotes by Margaret Atwood, more of a contemporary female writer. She says, potential has a shelf life, and I think that's true also. Like, if you're going to be an athlete, man, you better get your act together when you're young, get in the big competitions, get a good coach, or your time's going to go. And don't get injured or you're screwed. That's what happened to me. Margaret Atwood continues, divorce is like an amputation. You survive, but there's less of you. Yeah, that's another thing, too. I see a lot of women say, oh, I'm a great mom, and they divorce their husband, break up their family. I'm like, if you break up your family, you're not being such a good mom. Okay, Rita Mae Brown quote, divorce is a human tragedy that reduces everything to cash. Yeah, it like turns the parents against each other, especially if the kids are young and there's a custody thing. It's bad. Margaret Atwood, stupidity is the same as evil if you judge by the results. Yeah, and I think there's some truth in that. Basically, the stupider the population gets, the more the controller can force bad things on them. So there is a consequence for all the morons. So like the stupider America gets, the more everybody, the smart people too, are forced into nonsense. And just because they're overwhelmed by the majority. That's the tyranny of the majority. It can be very bad. Okay, Alan J. Lerner. A sinner can reform, but stupidity is forever. W.H. Auden. First of all, here's a quote about him by Orwell. Orwell thought he was a wimp. He basically said, the high water mark of socialist literature is Auden, a sort of gutless Kipling. Yeah, that's the thing, too. That's why godless literature, it always stinks, because it has no moral foundation. It has no higher ethics. It has no standards to go by. So when you get past the superficial little glitter here and there, it's basically weak. Okay, a couple quotes by W.H. Auden. He lived from 1907 to 1973. He said, the most important truths are those which society least wants to hear. All good drama has two movements. The first is the making of a mistake, and the second is the discovery that it was a mistake. A poet is, before anything else, a person who is passionately in love with language. Geniuses are the luckiest of mortals because they must do, what they must do is at the same time what they most want to do. Art is born of humiliation. Yeah, we learn a lot from screwing up. Unfortunately, the cost is high. Okay, so those are the letter A quotes for today. Hope that was interesting and useful.